Okay, folks, thanks for coming today. My name is Tim Horniak. I'm a freelancer here at the FCCJ. Before we begin, I'd ask you all to put your smartphones or mobile phones onto silent mode, please. So today we're going to be talking about sustainable energy. And before I introduce our guests, I think I just wanted to say this topic is of interest to me, as with many people in and involved with Japan, because of course 5 years ago we had the Fukushima disaster. And I think after that disaster, a lot of us were expecting Japan to turn heavily to sustainable forms of energy, but that really hasn't happened. If I'm not mistaken, the energy mix has about 10% of sustainable energy forms in Japan, which is not very high compared to other countries. Meanwhile, Japan is building 48 new coal-fired stations, power stations, which is quite amazing. And just the other day, we had controversy because the operator Kyushu Electric of active nuclear power plant in Kagoshima refused to shut down the power plant because of based on a request by the governor of Kagoshima. Kyushu Electric, of course, is based here in this building here in Tokyo. Anyway, so these forces, the push to renew nuclear, the push to build coal stations in Japan, are dramatically in contrast with some of the objectives of sustainable energy, as I'm sure you would agree. Anyway, without further ado, our guests today include, right here, we have Mr. Ronnie Belmans, who is Executive Director at the Global Smart Grid Federation. Next, beside him, we have Mr. Bo Normak, who's a Senior Policy Advisor at the Renewable Energy Institute. And Hiroshi Takahashi is professor at Tsuru University. And this little gathering today comes before a forum later this week as part of the Renewable Energy Institutes, and they're going to be talking about the Asia Smart Supergrid. The Asia Supergrid, of course, is a plan to link countries in East Asia via undersea cable so we can transfer electricity from one country to another. I think we're going to be talking more about that in detail. I think it's a very interesting, ambitious, but is it a realistic plan? So I think to begin, we're going to be starting with Mr. Belmans, if I'm not, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Normak, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I will actually start sharing with you some of the concepts and solutions that have been used in the Nordic electricity system. And the main message is the role of interconnections, what they are playing in building the system, which I think is quite important when you look at what we can expect to happen in Asia later. So starting by the Nordic production system is a little unique in the sense that it started very early with a market integration, but also a physical integration. And if you look at the production systems in the various countries, they are, I mean, both in magnitude and in type of production, they are quite different. I mean, Denmark has about 50-50 with wind and fossil. Norway has 100% hydro. Sweden has a mixture of nuclear, hydro, and we have wind, and we have also bio. And Finland also fossil, nuclear, and also some, I would say, some bio and some wind. We have also added, which I will talk a little more about, we have added the Baltic countries are today an integral part of the Nordic electricity system. Being quite small in volume, I think it's quite important. It was very important for the Baltic countries to become an integral part of the Nordic system. Because what we have learned in the Nordic system is that by combining the systems and have very strong interconnections, what has been built over the years is we have interconnection capacity between the Nordic countries that is in the range of 30% of peak power, which is very, very high compared to European standards and also standards on other places. But what that means is that we can all share the benefits of this interconnected system in 3 ways. And one is we can share reserves, which means each country doesn't need to keep reserve capacity. We can share it. We also have a seasonal effect because the production in the Nordic system from a wet and a dry year varies quite a lot, and there, of course, we can have the benefit of using neighboring countries, for instance, if we have a dry year. And for a wet year, we can export quite a lot. And then we have what we call situations. I mean, it can be that we have more or less wind production. It can be that we have more or less nuclear units online. And this can change quite fast. And we can manage this situation by having the bigger system. So altogether, the interconnected system serves 3 purposes: that we can secure supply, we can create value, and we can promote renewables. And in fact, accept a very, very high penetration of renewables. What has this meant if you look historically? I mentioned that we have already strong interconnected systems, but what is happening now is that we are expanding this interconnected system. You can see that the development in the recent years is that interconnection capacity has increased, and the forecast it will increase quite a lot because there are a number of interconnections under construction. And of course, this goes together with the transformation of the electricity system towards a more renewable system. And I should mention also, which is quite important, that when people see this picture, all the interconnections, you might expect that this will make things very costly, but the effect is actually the other way around. Of course, we are investing in interconnection capacity, but by having high utilization of the production and we can allow more renewables, the effect is actually that the costs are going down. This is a curve that shows the price development on the market price development. Is both the German, the Danish West, and the Nord Pole price. And you can see, particularly if you look at the last 5 years, that the pool prices have consistently gone down. And also you can see that the variations, these spikes that we used to have when we had, for instance, the dry year, has basically disappeared. So today we have a reverse problem. I would say that the costs are too low. It's more how you can encourage investments in this climate. But certainly the fears that were in Scandinavia that we would import the high German prices have really not materialized at all. It's on the contrary. Then going forward again, we are looking at, and this is for the Nordic country as a whole, we have today, as I showed, a mixture of different production resources. The planning is, or the most likely, I would say, scenario would be that we will phase out all the fossil. Actually, by 2030, you will not see any more fossil production in Nordic countries. And beyond 2030, also it's likely nuclear will be phased out. So we are looking for a 100% renewable system in the Nordic system. And I would say that a decade ago, people would have said this is impossible, you cannot manage this type of system. Today we are quite confident that we can manage this system, and the interconnections is one part in this equation. So looking at the electricity trade in 2015, the arrows that show the flows, the typical flows, and you can see that we had about 5 gigawatt capacity to Europe from northern countries. We were trading 28 terawatt hours, and we had a 14 terawatt hours net export. If you look at the future scenario, we expect that by 2050 we will have a significant expansion of the grid capacity, and as I said before, we will have 100% renewable production in the Nordic countries. We would have 23 gigawatt of capacity to Europe, trade 125 terawatt hours, and have a net export of 50 terawatt hours. Bearing in mind this is the typical year because, of course, as I mentioned, we will have dry years also in the future, and then the export will be close to zero. But on average, we will have a significant export. And what about the prices? Because how will the prices develop? Because in my mind, I mean, the most important thing for Nordic countries and for Europe as a whole also is to keep competitive pricing. And things are looking pretty good. I would say this is a forecast that was made by IEA. They made a special study on the Nordic system, where the expectation is that prices will actually continue to go down. And then they will go up slightly, but they will end up at the level of about 50 euro per megawatt hour. I said that in another setting. My personal opinion is that this is an overestimation. It's more likely the prices will be lower than higher. So we could end up with something like 40 euros per megawatt hour, which is quite competitive. So in summary, the Nordic electricity system is based on both the physical and market integration, and that makes it possible to have a high penetration of renewables, to have efficient use of the collective production resources, and a positive development of both prices and the reduction in price volatility. The interconnections so far are characterized by high capacity, good return on investments. I didn't show figures, but I can say the figures show that the investments made in interconnections are very good. And if we go if I look down the road, what will we expect? We will expect to have say 100% renewables, or very close to that. We will increase interconnection capacity even more, and we will have low and competitive electricity prices in the Nordic system. So by that, I turn over to my colleague Ronnie Belmans, who will talk about the European picture. This was the... So I can change presentations here if I get it.
Thank you. That was very, very interesting. Certainly encouraging to see that things are going better than expected, that I would have expected in the Nordic countries, with the interconnectedness and the high percentage of renewables that are coming into the mix here. Okay, and now we'll hear from Ronnie Belmans, please.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and I'm going to give you the perspective of, Boo says continental Europe, but my colleague, I'm going to give the whole picture of Europe, trying to give the whole picture of Europe and showing what we think there are similarities in what's happening in Japan and its surrounding countries, what kind of elements that we can bring to the discussion, and see how we can really make things moving at both sides of the equation. If you look at Europe, Japan has part of the system being 50 Hertz, part of the system being 60 Hertz. We in Europe always have 50 Hertz, but all the systems are not connected. They are not synchronously merged. And you see here in different colors, Ireland, then you have the UK, then you have the part of the Nordic countries which Boo in detail addressed, Denmark being part of the dark blue, and then you have the purple, the Baltic states. These are 5 different synchronous zones. And you can compare that with what's happening in Japan, where you have different parts of the 60 Hertz and 50 Hertz system, which are not also synchronously operating. Okay, so there is a total resemblance with what is happening there, except that you have even a more difficult problem with the 2 frequencies. However, DC links are needed between non-synchronous zones. And part of the DC links, Boo has already shown. What is the dark part, the dark blue part, serves approximately 400 million people. So the dark blue part is a system serving 400 million inhabitants. That's a very big system. It's the biggest synchronous system in the world. If you compare that with the Asia grid we are discussing this week in Japan, that might serve, if it comes to a reality, 4 billion people. That's just 1 0 more.
Could I ask you just quickly, what does HVDC mean, for those who are not familiar with it?
The HVDC means high voltage direct current, so 0 Hertz. The batteries, okay? Small batteries, but then also the direct current which was invented first by Mr. Edison,
Okay.
certain American lunatic 150 years ago. Okay, and DC, there you can go from one system to another. If you look at Japan, you have 50 hertz Tokyo and
North of Tokyo.
north of Tokyo, and you have the southwest of Japan where there is 60 hertz. In between, if you want to couple those systems, you have to go from 50 hertz to DC to 0 and back to 60. You never can go from one directly to the other. You always have to pass via DC.
Okay.
And that's the importance of DC. That technology is now available. There are a lot of competing companies in the world. One of the most important one, and it's not saying too much, is Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi Electric, which is one of the leading companies in the world, with others together. But I think it's important also to know that the Japanese industry there as one of the leading companies in hand.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we were showing you the northern part of the system. Here we go for the whole thing. There are a lot of projects coming along, and the main idea is, in the continental European part, we have a very big development of renewables. If we're talking about Germany, for instance, they have 30 gigawatt, which is roughly, if I remember well from the figures, something comparable to what the TEPCO, half of what TEPCO is delivering here, 30 gigawatt of wind and 30 gigawatt of PV in one country. Okay, Italy has more PV. In Europe, there's a lot of sponsored renewables being developed. We're talking about several hundred of gigawatt as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, this means that we have to cover that system, and it works. But the problem is that it's depending on the weather situation. And if the weather is not working too well, for instance, if there's too much wind, you have a problem. You would say if there's no wind, you have a problem. No wind is not really a problem, because that's predictable. But if you go to very high winds, at a certain moment, wind farms protect themselves. And then they stop from a very high level immediately to 0. And in Denmark, they had a few of those challenges, but they managed. To give you one small detail, but maybe interesting as a journalist to show the people what's happening, the biggest problem there was this year in Europe was the eclipse, the solar eclipse. Okay? Where there was in Germany, in between 20 minutes, the equivalent of 20 nuclear power plants that disappeared and reappeared. The sun, eclipse, gone. The equivalent of 20 nuclear power plants.
So you're saying there's that much solar power capacity
There's so much
in Germany
Yeah.
that the eclipse affected it to such a degree.
Yeah. So that new system really poses challenges. And as an engineering researcher and that kind of stuff, I love it. And the industry also loves it because it brings new things. If you look, that's about reliability. If you look at the wholesale prices in Europe, they are converging due to the good operational market. The markets are coupled, but there are still a lot of hidden costs. For instance, if you need balancing power for wind and solar, it cost in 2015 roughly 1 giga euro, so 1 billion euro, to the consumers to balance it all. And if you would have more transmission, those costs would decrease immensely. So I'm an engineer, I can't help it. I calculate with kilo and mega and giga also in euros. That's easier to billion and million. That's easier for me. But don't underestimate those costs to keep the system in balance. What are the trends? We are going more and more in Europe to that direct current, that 0 hertz current. also on land. We are now building connections on land in Sweden, top, on the right-hand side between France and Spain, on the left-hand side between Germany and Belgium, in the UK and within Germany, on land. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason being that people don't want to see any high voltage lines anymore, overhead lines. They want to see it underground. And as soon as you get underground, if you have to do it underground, you make from your 50 hertz, zero, a cable, and again 50 hertz. It's much cheaper because the changing from 50 hertz to zero and from zero back to 50 hertz, those units cost a lot of money, but the cost of the cable is cheaper than a cable on EC. So as soon as you have to go underground, you go DC. And it goes fast. Look at the Spanish-France connection. We have waited for 30 years, 30 years, to make that connection, and it never happened with overhead lines. When they changed their mind to bring it underground with direct current, it was built in 4 to 5 years. Acceptation is a very important part, and I think also in Japan, certainly with earthquakes that you have, I think that making it underground can make it much more reliable. These are all parts of the game we are talking about. If you look at regulation, you have to do the cost, but very important is that the building blocks have to be there. The planning and the design, the ownership has to be clear, and the costs have to be allocated. And very important to know is that in Europe, we have split the system in generation, high voltage grids, low voltage grids, and selling electricity. Now, if the high voltage grid is an independent company, it can much better collaborate with its neighboring companions. And you see that the discussion of lines between Belgium and Germany was before very difficult, because those companies were vertically integrated and the transmission grid would like to cooperate, but then you get competition for your generator. And that vertically integrated company said no. But now when it's split, it comes much more better to fully discussing the real problems of transmission and bringing systems together. And if you bring systems together, the prices are stable, the prices are lower, the availability is better, and the investments needed in generation are lower. And you can accept more renewables. So that's a big message. And if you look what's happening in Europe, at a certain moment in the beginning of the 90s, there was a big press article. You can't blame the journalist, you have to blame the guy who was interviewing, from a top guy of a German electricity company. And that top guy, 1995, so 20 years ago, that top guy said, we have calculated as an electricity company that we can never have more than 4% of renewables wind in our system. 4. In the 50 hertz zone, the east of Germany, they now have 4.0. And it works every day. Okay? So never trust predictions, certainly if there are in the future.
Never say never.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go on to our third speaker now, Professor Takahashi of Tsuru University, who studies electricity system reform, and we've certainly had some reforms here in Japan with the liberalization of consumer electricity. So, Professor, please.
Thank you, moderator. These two gentlemen made a brilliant speeches about necessity and the reality of the interconnection of transmission grids. Now, as a Japanese, I would like to make a few, comments or messages to, especially to Japanese people and society. As a Japanese, I fully understand that international grid connection seems something unreal. It's impossible. We have believed long time that it is totally impossible to, say, import and export electricity for Japan with neighboring countries. However, now we know from these speeches that international grid connection is so real and so natural and rational for Europe. Why do they so? Oh, they explained maybe there are two reasons. Very simple reason. The first reason probably because it's economically efficient. If we have expensive electricity and they have cheap electricity, why not trade? Very simple reason. Second reason is probably more important. International grid connection helps stable power supply. If we have a scarcity in supply capacity and they have surplus, why not cooperate? Very simple reasons. And these two conditions should apply to Japan too. If so, why not us? And also, regardless to say, it is so natural to make international connection, say, in the field of telecommunications, internet. And if so, why not electricity? Maybe we, Japanese people and Japanese society, should get out of an old myth that international grid connection is unreal. And also, I'd like to stress that interconnection has never been more needed than before in Japan. First, full-fledged market liberalization has started in Japan recently under the name of the electricity system reform. Without a liberalized market and independent grid companies, transmission system operators, international trade of electricity would not work. Market competition inherently pursues a wider area of the market. That's why. Secondly, Japan, we have started massive introduction of the renewable energies recently. And in its nature of intermittent output, renewables require flexible system operations in wider area. And the reason why Europe has been striving hard to expand interconnection is because they have these two backgrounds for these 2 decades. So, yeah, we have to admit Japan has been delayed, but these two reasons have finally emerged in Japan too. That is why we have to start such a project like Asia Super Grid as soon as possible. In fact, I myself have proposed an idea of international grid connection with neighboring countries right after the Fukushima accident in 2011 under the name of the Asian Renewable Energy Community 5 years ago. Needless to say, that is a copy of the European coal and steel community, which has started in 1952 as a milestone to the European Union, you may know. It took more than 60 years for Asian countries to possibly, and I hope, start to share vested interests such as energy. And I strongly believe that Japan should take strong leadership in such realizing such a vision in cooperation with other neighboring countries like China, South Korea, and Russia. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very interesting. Thanks to all our speakers. I'm going to open the floor to questions, but I'm going to start with a question myself first, if I may. My question is for Mr. Normak, who is an advisor to the Renewable Energy Institute, which, if I'm not mistaken, is behind this grand scheme to link up countries here in East Asia. We've talked about the difficulties in Japan. We have different regions of Japan with different frequencies of power. It seems to be even difficult to do this in Japan itself, to exchange electricity. What is the current status of the scheme to create this Asia supergrid?
First of all, a comment on the Japanese situation. I mean, Japan has, apart from the 1560 hertz, Japan has also, I mean, actually more regions that are loosely interconnected. And the reason that they are not connected more, I mean, is both physical, but also, I would say, even more market-oriented. That within the regions, the producers, of course, prefer to keep, if not monopoly, but still to keep have their own market, so to say. And so that is a regulatory, but there we know that there are positive things going on in Japan to change regulation. And then going beyond that, about this notion of the Asian supergrid, I think the grand scheme is based on the I mean, assumption, which is quite real, that renewable will take a significantly larger part of the system, and that goes for both Japan and the neighboring countries. And if you just look at this system from an overall, I would say, engineering optimization point of view, then interconnections, I mean, make a lot of sense. As I mentioned there, if you look at the overall system cost, the actual cost for the interconnection is a minor part of the total cost compared to the cost of building all this generation. And if you can improve the use of the renewable production by interconnection, it again makes a lot of sense. So the problems are not so much technical, and they are not so much overall economic, but it's more down to the details. How can you make market situation that allows for this to happen? How can you have regulatory schemes to make it happen, and so forth? So I think what would be quite important is to make some first steps. I mean, we notice here that, I mean, Japan is an island, also electrically. I mean, Korea is also an electric island. So you have two electrical islands that are close, and I think it should start somewhere here.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. Okay, questions, please. Yes, sir. Yeah. Could you use the microphone, please, and also identify yourself, if you could. Thank you.
I'm Hal Foster. I'm a freelance journalist, used to work at the Los Angeles Times. Mr. Belmans, I was curious about, you mentioned that the transmission companies have now been cut loose from the vertical integration. Was that an EU-wide decision, or how did that come about?
It was thank you for the question. It was an EU-wide decision, and it was one of the very wise decisions of the EU. In that respect, if you don't have an independent transmission system operator and you want to enter as a new entrant in the power generation, that transmission system operator who is integrated with the other power plants that are there in the same company will not be very, say, helpful in connecting you to the grid. That's say it the least. Second part is, and that's the negative part of the game, so it has to be disconnected to make generation really competitive. But the positive part of the message is, if those transmission system operators are independent, they are much more eager to optimize the flows in a larger area. Okay? And they look at their peers across the state borders and build that grid together. And then, for instance, you get the possibility to take the two hydro batteries of Europe, being Norway and the Alps, and bringing that in a convenient way to everyone, enabling to serve the wind in Germany and in Spain. For instance, the UK now has more and more connections with the continent, so the UK would never be able to develop their wind plants offshore if they are not well connected to the rest of Europe. Whether they Brexit, yes or no, that's their problem, but if we disconnect, they are in the black. Okay, that's a fairly easy thing to do. The more you interconnect, and you are much more eager to interconnect with your peers, the better it is. And the fact that they now can horizontally coordinate as independent companies make things moving much faster.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? John, please. Yeah.
Yeah, John Boyd, freelance. I wonder if you could explain, please, as I understand it, wind and solar, because it's so unpredictable, the way the grid is set up at the present, it needs constant generation, but that we don't get that with wind and solar. So, are you building new transmission lines to make this possible, or how is it being done? I'm really curious. Thank you.
Maybe I can give one comment on that. I'm also serving on the board of the national TSO in Sweden, and that we are building quite a lot of new transmission. And just to put things in perspective there, because the notion is that everything is built just to incorporate more renewables, but that's not correct. I mean, if you look at our investment there in the Swedish grid, is 1/3 is to incorporate new renewables, 1/3 is to actually increase security of supply because we have some outdated equipment, and 1/3 is to increase the market, which we would have done anyway. So I think that's important to keep in mind. I would also say that I mentioned again that the cost for building these grids, I mean, in no way is, I would say, jeopardizing the electricity prices. To give that on a big scale, an example that in the entire European grid, the plan is now to invest about 150 billion euros until 2030 in new grids, and that will impact the electricity prices by 1%. On the other hand, the expectation is that the market price for electricity will go down more than 1%. So from an overall perspective, that is actually positive. So I think, again, the challenge for grid developers is more what Ronnie pointed out here. That is the possibility to actually build the transmission we need. It's not a cost issue, it's more acceptance. And that's why we increasingly tend to use a more expensive solution, but that they are accepted. But again, the plan I outlined for Europe, that is based on that you actually are using quite a lot of these expensive solutions as well. But still, it's not a cost problem. Maybe Ronnie, you can elaborate more.
The two important things that I would like to add here. First of all, there is a cost of not having a connection for society. If you have two zones with a different price, somebody is paying too much. Okay, and if the person who's paying too much would pay less if there would be a connection, you see what you are losing not having that connection. Okay, and if you can advance in time an investment that you don't have to wait 30 years, even if that investment costs more, the fact that you have it tomorrow gives you an overall cost reduction for society. So that's a very interesting debate you have to take care of. You can say, okay, we can wait, we can that, but as long as there is $10 price difference between A and B, this costs society money, period. Second thing is, if you're talking about photovoltaics, about solar energy, that's in fact a bit of different from wind energy. Because a lot of the PV, a lot of the solar will be distributed on houses and on buildings. And we will see, and this country has certainly a leading position there, we will see a very fast development even further from batteries. So the balancing of the PV will be done locally. And you will have the big flows from wind all across Japan, all across larger areas, all across Asia. But PV will be, for a big chunk, locally balanced. Okay, and that's the difference between both type of energy resources. Wind, offshore wind, an offshore wind park of 1,000 megawatt or 2,000 megawatt, you cannot balance. You have to balance in a big system.
So I'm sorry, you need a new grid then?
Yeah, then but less for PV.
Yeah.
PV will also need interconnections, but you can do a first step there with PV, with controlling the demand in houses and batteries. Okay, so you can handle them differently.
Okay, thank you. Let's get to some more questions. Yes, sir.
Siegfried Nittel writing for the Austrian newspaper, the Standard. Some years ago, there was some news in the newspapers about a transmission line from Norway to Germany to bring a lot of electricity from Norway to Germany. What about this? About this plan, about this idea, and connected to this, perhaps to Professor Takahashi. So I think I read something about a transmission line from Siberia to Hokkaido. Is there ideas? Do some people develop this idea to develop such a system?
Norway to Germany is almost being built, so it's all a question of when is the cable be ready. That's okay. The Norwegians, if there's money to earn in energy in Europe, it flows to Norway. Okay, that's rule number one. Okay, we pay them an awful lot of money for oil, we pay them an awful lot of money for natural gas, now we're paying for balancing wind and solar, so they're poor guys. But anyway, being serious, Norway is regarded for the grid between the UK, Norway, Denmark, Holland, Germany, Holland, Belgium, that North Sea grid. Norway is regarded as being the quote-unquote battery of that whole system, and that battery has to be connected to the wind, so that there will be an awful lot of cables flowing out of Norway, and they will use their capacity of hydro for balancing it. Hydro will disappear as a base load, because Norway has always used this hydro to flat supply the country. It will be used totally different. It will be used very dynamically to fill up the gaps. And it was also a question before, do we need, what about base load? Somebody hinted to that. The term base load, which I studied very immensely and which was unavoidable when I did my studies as an engineer, by the time I retire, which is not so far away, it will be gone. Base load as a basic idea is gone. It will be dynamic balancing between a massive amount of elements in the grid. Much more fun as an engineer.
I have a comment also on this Norwegian-German cable, because it's also an example of how technology has advanced, because we used to have, first we have 100 kilometers was like a maximum length for a cable to make sense. Then it was 200 kilometers. Today, a lot of the cables planned in Europe are between 600 and 700 kilometers long. And also the power rating has increased dramatically. So when we talk about here building the Asian grid with submarine cables in this region, most of the cables are actually shorter than the European cables. So I think that is a significant development in that area. But you also had another question. Was
Siberia to Hokkaido?
Yeah, that was to colleague Takahashi.
Yeah.
Yes, there are a couple of, or probably more, ideas of such projects of the interconnection between Japan and the neighboring countries like Russia, Siberia, South Korea, and so on. But none of them has been materialized yet. There are, many researches, feasibility researches, but main reason is that the Japanese government has not decided to do so. That's why, only commercial or companies, private companies, cannot start such a big project. Mainly two reasons. One is because it's a diplomatic issue, not just a commercial private issue. But probably we need to have certain international agreement, treaty with counterpart. So without the government commitment, no interconnection would be realized. Second, it's a grid business. Grid business is a regulated business anyway. So each company needs to get approval from the regulatory body. So we need that the government, Japanese government, make a commitment and a decision. Okay, we will go for it. We will start the international connection of electricity with other countries. That is now the biggest hurdle for such an idea to be realized, I think.
You had a comment?
Yeah, I fully agree with what my colleague is saying. What you should do, and that was a good thing about what done the European Commission too, they made it possible for merchant investors to invest in cables. Okay? It was legally possible. None of them has been built. Between the UK and Ireland, a merchant company was ready to build the cable. And you know what the TSOs did? They break it for 1 or 2 years and they build it themselves. So if you have merchants that are trying to do it and give the opportunity to the commercial business to build it, the TSOs and the regulators and the government wake up and say, we are not giving this out of hand, we are going to do it ourselves. But you need leadership and you don't need fear there. And that was the good thing about that merchant lines.
Okay, thank you. We had another question here in the middle.
Süddeutsche Zeitung Neidhardt. You Scandinavians are speaking of 100% renewable, which is achievable in a few decades, maybe earlier. Japan is planning 40 or 42 new coal plants. Doesn't this sound like 19th century to you? And a second question, there's a Japanese group, they're planning a thing that they call not the smart grid that everybody's speaking about, but a post-smart grid, like that they compare it to the internet, where everybody can connect to the grid on its own, on their own term, with different voltages and different AC/DC. Do you know anything about that, and would that be another big step forward?
Well, the first comment, I mean, I will not step in and I mean, make some, I would say, give grades to the plans in Japan. But of course, from my perspective, I think it would be much wiser for Japan to go for renewable solutions, because we strongly believe it's not even environmentally, but it's also cheaper. So so that would be. As for the smart grid, I mean, we have the chairman of Global Smart Grid Federation sitting here, so he should be able to talk about smart grid.
Why did I know this was going to happen? I will first also reply to your question about coal-fired power plants. The age of big power plants is gone. And whether you call them nuclear or whether you call them coal-fired, it's gone. They are not compatible with renewables. Renewables request dynamic balancing. And you cannot do that with power plants which have a very high capital investment and an awful lot of start-up time and not much dynamics. So if we go for more renewables, they are not compatible. And I can prove it in that respect They have built 6 or 7 big coal-fired power plants in Europe over the last 5 years to the grid, and they all are now in a loss position. All of them. Some of them will probably not operate for more than 10 years in their lifetime. 1 billion euro invested in a coal-fired power plant. That's one thing. About smart grids, and there's even a term for what you're saying. It's called the Internet of Power.
The Internet of Power.
The Internet of Power, where every node can be a storage device, can be a demand, and can be a supplier. And I was hinting to that with the PV and the distributed batteries and that and demand side management. What you will see, and that's part of the Global Smart Grids Federation, what we are doing, is that you get the equilibrium between demand and supply. We now define that equilibrium on a country basis. Okay? That equilibrium will be built up from a node, your house, to a street, to a village, to a town, to an island here in Japan, to the overall Japan system. And building up that Internet of Power needs a control of all your elements in the grid. And that's something we could not do before. But now if we all connect those elements via the Internet of Data, then we can find an equilibrium back, not based on an equilibrium on power, but really on a controlling element, so you can build up that equilibrium, and you may disconnect from the power grid, but you will replace then the disconnection of the power grid by a connection to a data grid. So that's, now I'm talking about something that will be far away from, beyond my retirement. But anyway, it's big fun to do research on that.
Okay, thank you. Some more questions, please. Let's go here on the left side.
My name's Joan Anderson from Soka Gakkai International. I'm very interested in what you were saying, Professor Takahashi, about the, what was it, AERC, Asian Energy.
Renewable Energy Community.
Yes. And I'd just like to know what you feel the prospects are for regional collaboration and how security issues and fears play into that, because obviously the Asian region is a little bit different to the European one, despite Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you for asking. It's a very, it's just an idea, but you know, when we think of the beginning of the European coal and steel community 60 years ago, I don't think this idea is something unreal. You know, Japan had started the massive introduction of renewable, but mainland China has been advancing further. You know, China is now the world's #1 country of the introduction of the wind power, by far the #1. And so Chinese government is very eager to introduce renewable energy in its country. Of course, it's a huge country. It's the largest market in the world. So still they have room to you know, adjust within its own territory. However, in the near future, they would feel, oh, they need an international connection with neighboring countries. And South Korea, it's also it's a peninsula country, and it has no international connection. So say if we could connect Japan, South Korea, China, or even Russia by international grid, we can form a common electricity market. And also we can adjust demand and supply in such a wide area with high penetration of the intermittent electricity. So economically and also technically, it's totally feasible and rational, I think. And the problem is diplomatic relations. And I think that's why we should try. You know, unfortunately, Japan does not have a good relations with neighboring countries right now. And that is why we should start at least discussion of such a great idea of the cooperation and economic interdependence. If we deepen the economic interdependence, we could definitely improve the diplomatic, political relations as European countries have been trying for a few decades. That's why it's just a starting point. But unfortunately, there is no political leadership so far in Japan for such a great idea. So I'd like to stress that, hey, let's start discussion at least.
Thank you. You had a comment?
I think we should not always ask politicians to do things. If I look into Europe, the unification of Europe was done in 1950, 8 years before the European Coal and Steel Union was started. If you look at the unification of Ireland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland are electrically connected. I'm proud to say that my industry I'm working in is always at least in Europe 10 years ahead of bringing together people that politicians even think about it. And I'm proud to be part of it. And you know, there is a big war that has been going on Cyprus, between Turkish Cyprus and Greek Cyprus. Those two parts are electrically connected. Okay? Turkey is outside of the European Union. Turkey is synchronized with the rest of Europe. So we are ahead of things, and don't wait for politicians.
Okay, very interesting. If only electrical engineers around the world, right?
Exactly.
I think we're running out of time here. Maybe I have one more question here, please.
Thank you. My name is Khaldun Azare for Pan-Europe News. I report for the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So we are very much interested in good news about the oil prices, which is now going down. So maybe my question is not exactly about the grids. How do you see the renewals and the oil consumption in the world? Do you see the prospects that oil will still be very important, at least in producing electricity for the heavy oil? Thank you.
Okay, who wants to take that?
I'm not sure if I have good use for it, because as we see the world evolving, that electricity will be possible to produce in large quantity at very low prices. And that means that we strongly believe that electricity will take market share in the energy sector for many reasons. One is that it's clean, but also that it's very competitive. And of course, one sector is the transport sector, where electrification will make inroads. So, I mean, long term, I think that it's a natural process that, again, that for pure commercial reasons, renewable electricity will be competitive and can be used increasingly. To give you one example, that the heating sector is one sector where we today use gas. I am convinced that you will see in the not so distant future, you will use electricity instead of the gas and use heat pumps, because that combination is becoming unbeatable if you want to produce heat. And so in many sectors you will see an increased electrification, and the electricity will be produced with renewables. Maybe Ronnie?
Fully agree, and it's even very compatible renewables and those new applications, because both heat pumps and heating, it's easy to store surpluses, okay, because storing heat doesn't cost you a penny of any money. Second part is electric vehicles. I fully agree with what Boo is saying, and again, it's about storage. I'm driving now 1 year an electric vehicle. I've driven 35,000 kilometers in 1 year without any problem, and charging it when it's at the office, I plug it in. When it's home, I plug it in. I don't charge en route. It's just I pick up the electricity where I happen to be. And being the fact that those two applications, stealing from oil, being heating / driving, have a good storage device intrinsically in them, makes them extremely compatible with what renewables are doing. So it's going to be a different time, and what you already see, and that's what I hear from my colleagues from economics, because we are picking up the top of the demand of oil. And it's all about marginal pricing. You see those prices going down because the most expensive oil we don't need anymore. And that's a very interesting thing to happen, because some Arabic countries don't like that because their margin is a bit lower now. So it's fun.
Okay, Professor Takahashi, any closing remarks on oil? How do you feel about the future of oil?
Basically, I agree. And electrification may advance, but total demand for energy in advanced countries would diminish. So it's better to supply electricity as energy from renewable energy. That's my basic understanding.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think we'll wrap it up there. Before we go, I'd just like to present our guests with honorary memberships here at the FCCJ. And thank you very much, Mr. Belmans, Mr. Normak, and Professor Takahashi. Please join me in thanking our guests. And once again, the forum of the Renewable Energy Institute is happening later this week on Thursday and Friday, and that's at the Yuraksho International Forum. So if you're interested, please consult with the folks down there at that table. Thank you.